everyone, welcome to today's virtual paint and sip. I hope everybody's doing good. This is the painting that we're going to be doing today, some daisies, and we're just going to go over the materials real quick. So you should have 4 colors. You should have the blue, green, white, and yellow, and then you should also have 4 brushes. You should have a large flat brush, a smaller, more pointed flat brush, and 2 detailing brushes. And of course, your canvas, your paper towels, and a cup of water. So I'm sure you have a picture of this and you've gotten a good look at this, so we're going to switch it out for a new canvas. Okay, so first we're going to go in with the large flat brush, and we're going to go in with the blue color. So I recommend just getting your brush a little bit wet first, just a little bit, and then dip into your blue, and we're going to start in the corners of the canvas. So we're going to start up here, and we're going to go side to side like that in a diagonal motion. And make sure your paintbrush is a little wet, but not too wet, like it shouldn't be dripping too much. But we want it to be wet because we're going to blend towards white as we get into the middle of the canvas. So we've got that corner covered, and now we're going to make sure the brush is still wet, and we're going to dip into the blue again and go through the other corner. Again, we want the corners to be the darkest part of the painting. Just keep going diagonal, back and forth. Make sure you really darken up the corners. Don't add any paint to the brush, just keep gently fading it out towards the middle. And it gets a little bit streaky, which is fine, we kind of want it to look like that. But if it starts getting too streaky and too dry, don't add more paint. Just add a little bit of water. Just keep the brush strokes going all relatively in the same direction so we can keep the flow of the painting consistent. Just keep going until all the white is covered. Again, don't add more paint, just keep going. We want it to kind of have that streaky effect. So just give it one last brush over. And now you can see we have this nice ombre effect where it looks like some light is coming right through the middle. And I'll show you what to do just in case. If you use too much water, it starts dripping, right? Just brush up really quick and just keep brushing up until that water has dried up and it's no longer dripping. So this is what it should look like. I'll give you guys a minute to catch up. If you are still going, just pause here because I am going to keep going. We do want it to dry though, just a little bit, because since we use the water, the canvas is a little bit wet. So just give it a second to dry. This is too wet, just go in very lightly, like so. And it should still give you that same look, but just for time's purpose here, I'm just going to use the paper towel. I'm just going with the brush to smooth it all out. Okay, great. So Now, this is what it should look like. I'll tilt that for you. We are gonna take the smaller, flat, round brush, and we're gonna stick it into the yellow. And here is where you're just gonna wanna mark. Let me set this up for you real quick. You're gonna wanna take little circles of yellow and you're gonna wanna mark where you want the center of your daisies to be. So we want one to kind of be in the right corner area. So, and we're gonna go back over it with yellow again later, so it's not too important how thick you lay it on. It's really just to map out the painting. So we have one on there, and then we're gonna do the tallest one up here. Gotcha. And they should look just like little yellow ovals. And then we're gonna put one more towards the bottom left. And this flat brush should kind of help, because the natural shape of the brush should help you make the little dot. There we go. We're just gonna wipe that off. You're gonna wanna give it a good rinse in the water. And then just wipe it off. Just gonna give everyone a second to get there. So, just make sure you've washed off that brush really well, because we are going to go in again with the same brush in our white. And this is how we're gonna make our petals. I would start by making the largest petal on the flower first, and the easiest way to make a petal is just in two little circular motions, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second. So, we're gonna wanna get one and go like that, and then go like that. And that gives you your general shape of a petal. And again, it doesn't matter if it's super white or not, because we're gonna go over it again just to make everything more opaque later on. I'm just gonna move that so you guys can see it a little bit better. And now, we're gonna go in and do the other petals. And the daisies are kind of drooping, so we're not gonna do like a complete circular daisy, but we're just gonna keep making downward facing petals. Just like that. And it's okay if your petals overlap. They're supposed to overlap a little bit. We'll go in and define one petal from another later on when we add the shadowing in the black. I want this petal to be in front, so I'm going to paint this one over it like that. So the petals are messy at the moment, as you can see. However, they should, the outline, the general outline should be there. Because we're going to go over it again, and you'll see that as time goes on, the real shape of the petals is just going to get clearer and clearer. So we're just going to go around and we're going to do that to all of the other flowers now. Again, start with the biggest petal and then just sort of move from there. Back in and do this one. I accidentally grabbed a little bit of yellow, but that's all right. And then we're just gonna add another little droopy petal right on the top. Like that. There we go. And as I said, the petals are really rough, really just not super defined, but still there. And we're going to start with the largest petal again on this flower. There we go. And another little curvy petal on the top. And too much paint, another little droopy petal on the top. And just make sure your white paint is all smoothed out properly, because that'll help it dry faster. So I'm not really adding any paint per se, I'm just going back in with the residue that's left on the brush, and I'm smoothing everything out properly to make sure there's no big globs of paint. That will make this take, a lot longer than it needs to. So I'm gonna just rinse off this brush because we don't want any paint to dry on it again. So we're just dipping it through the water, wiping it on the towel, and then we're gonna go back in with the same brush and the yellow, and we're gonna keep going over the little center of the flower until it's as yellow as we would like it. Because obviously they're looking pretty green right now. There we go. And then go back in with this one. There we go. We're going to give it a good rinse again. And I'm just going to turn this at a good angle for you guys. And you can pause here if you would like to catch up. So if you want to pause, this is a good opportunity while the canvas is in open position. All right. So I'm going to dip in the white again. Bit of a repetitive process, but we're just going to go over the petals one more time. And because you've already painted them, it should be really easy and really smooth to just take a little bit of paint and go over it, and it should make it so much more defined and so much more bright. And again, just use the little 1-2 technique to paint the petals. I'm going to do this one again. See, that's so simple, really quick, shouldn't take too long. Make sure that one's got it. And again, they're only white right now, but we are going to go back in and add some black and stuff to shadow it up. So back into the main one. Oh no, got a little bit of yellow in there. This one's being a bit difficult because I think it was too wet, but it's fine, we can just go over it again later. So as you can see, we've got the general base for our daisies done. And now that we have that going, we can start the jar. And this part shouldn't be too hard. You know what? We are actually missing one color. We also should have a black, as I'm sure you guys have already noticed. Okay, so you guys will have it. Should be a black. And we're gonna take the larger detailing brush and just get it just a tiny bit wet. And we're gonna take a dip into the black. And I think the easiest way to do this first is to outline where you want the edges of the top of the jar to be. So as you can see on the original, one of the edges is directly below this flower and one of the edges is directly below this flower. So that's one of the easiest ways to use like other landmarks in the painting to decide where you want the jar to go. So again, directly under this one, we're gonna make a little notch here. And then directly under this one, we're gonna make a little notch here. And this is gonna help us determine our open lip part of the jar. Again, just taking a little bit of black, we're gonna connect those two notches. And we can go over this lining together to make it a little bit cleaner in the future, but this is about what it should look like. Just make sure you guys can see that. And then we're gonna do the same on the bottom. If you take enough black paint, you shouldn't be running out too much by the end of the stroke. It's just easier to do it in one big motion rather than in a bunch of tiny ones. Tiny ones are good for cleaning up the line work, but in the beginning, it's probably just good to do one big sweep. So we have a rough outline of the jar here. And directly under that, you're gonna wanna do two little hills. One like this, and one like this. Perfect. And then, you're just gonna go out and down to make the body of the jar. And there you are. And we're just gonna add a little bit of detailing with the black as well. A tiny line in here, and a slightly larger line here. And then I would also add one here, and then just two coming up from there. And that's the basic outline for the jar, and it'll really come to life a little bit later when we start adding the highlights. But we should probably let the black dry before we do that. So, for one final time, I'm just gonna go back in with this brush and touch up the center of the flower. Depending on how bright yours are, you might not need to do this, but I think these ones needed a little bit. There we are. And then give it a good rinse again before we dip into the white with the same brush. And again, just take a little bit of white because you don't want to make it too wet. Perfect. Just a little bit of white on the brush. Alright, so if anybody needs to pause, I'm going to give them the opportunity by putting the painting towards you and just stepping out of the view. Alright. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can do the stems of our flower. So I'm just gonna rinse that brush off, wipe it off, and set it off to the side. So I was gonna take the smaller detailing brush for this, and again, just get it a little bit wet, and dip it into the green. And as a good technique to make sure that you're not grabbing too much green on your brush is when you grab it, just twirl it, hopefully you guys can see that, just twirl it against the edge of the cup, and it should collect all of your bristles together. All right, so we're gonna start at the lowest one, and we're gonna do a little curve like that. And again, same with the jar, it's just gonna be easier if you do it all in one motion. So we're gonna make it coming out of here. I'm gonna do a little mark, and then I'm gonna grab some of my green, a little bit of water, and we're just gonna go straight down. Back up again. Perfect. See? Pretty simple. Gonna do it with this one as well. This time, I think I'm gonna go from the bottom, just because of the angle that my canvas is at. Perfect. And finally, for the last one, I'm gonna mark this one here. Okay, so after we finish the stems, this is where we're gonna start going in and doing our shadowing. So take your larger detailing brush, and this is, I would say, the hardest part of the painting. Make sure your brush is pretty wet. And you're gonna wanna take a little bit of black and get it wet again and filter it out. So that way your brush barely has any black on it. It's more gray than anything. And you'll see what I mean, like why we would do this. So I'm gonna go through here, and you're gonna see that it's not really like super black. It's mostly just gray. Very faint, and it's just because we're gonna go with the lighter parts of the black first, and then we're gonna build up to a little bit darker. And you're gonna start going around the edges of these things. Sorry, I got it a bit too wet, but it's fine, we can just extend it out. Just take a little bit of black off the brush and then spread around the black that we do have on the canvas. So we're gonna go around the tops and the in-betweens, I guess you could call it, of the petals. And my brush only has just a little bit of water on it right now, and I'm just using it to spread down the black that I already put down. And again, just take, once you've got the black on there, just take a little bit of water, and we're just gonna keep like blending it out. Just gonna gradually keep spreading it. As you can see now, instead of black, we've just got this nice gray fade on all of the petals to help give it some shadowing. And this is really going to define the shape of your petals. I'm going to turn that towards you. Since it is the farthest flower, it's a bit hard to see. But you can kind of see that little gray shade. It's really faint. And now we're going to do the same thing, except we're just going to take a little bit more black on the brush than last time, but still keep your brush pretty wet. Turn towards me a little bit, make it more visible for you though. And always start up around the yellow circle, because it's gonna just give us the little shadowing we need here. And then drag it around. As the black gets darker, like this one is, you're only gonna wanna take it like right in the crevices of the petals like that. I'm just gonna blend it out a little bit. And we're just gonna add one more layer of black. This time, this should be the darkest layer that we do. So we're just layering up, mostly like gray to actual black. And again, make sure your brush is wet. So, you're gonna wanna go around again. If your brush is too wet, wipe it off and spread around the black you do have. And I'm just adding a few lines down the top here. And some down into the middle to give the petals just a little bit of texture. And we're gonna go back and do the highlights more towards the end, so if the flower's looking a little bit muddy, that's all right. And if you couldn't see that one all that well, don't worry about it, because we're just gonna go and we're gonna do the same thing on the other flowers. Take black, make sure your brush is wet, dip it in the water, and dab off a lot of the intense color. And that is pretty intense. So I'm gonna take the black off my brush, just water now basically, and we're just gonna spread around the black with water on our brush. Just a little bit of water. Perfect. Now, just keep blending out the black so it's not too harsh. Just with more water. You start taking it farther down the petals. Use it to outline. There we go. Now we've got the basic shadowing done, and we're just gonna go in with the last layer of black and add some intensity in there. As you can see, it's okay if the paint runs a little bit. And just make sure that your petals are a little bit gray casted. They're not completely white petals anymore. And you'll see why we're doing that a little bit later. I'm just gonna clean it up a little bit. There we go. Pretty satisfied with that. Now, we're gonna do the same with the last flower. Take black, wipe most of it off, go around the center of the flower. I need a little bit more black than that. Take it down the edges and some of the middle. And you should have a well-shadowed flower. Now I'm just gonna go back in and just add the black that I need, you know? A bit of a tedious process, but I would say it's worth it. I'm gonna go in and add the darkest parts of the shadow here. And this time my brush isn't too watery, I'm just taking just a little bit of black paint. And that's what's keeping it from sort of feathering out. Just the tiniest bit of black paint. go. And if anyone needs to pause, this would also be a good time to do that. Okay, if you don't need to pause, this is also a good time where I would take my brush and I'm going to dip back into the blue just to clean up my petals a little bit. And if your petals are a bit cleaner, then this step is just optional. You don't have to do this at all. And again, just taking the littlest bit of blue and going around it. And that looks harsh right now, but I'm going to do the same technique what I did with the black. And I'm just going to feather it out with some water. There we go. And keep feathering it out with water. Because acrylic is a water-based paint, so as you get it wet, you can blend it again even after it's dried. So that's essentially what I'm doing right now. Just gonna go sharpen out these daisy petals a little bit. And I'm just going to go through and just blend those out with a little bit of water. Good as new. This is just a good time to do any touch-ups that you want. I'm going to go back in with my yellow just to make sure that these are bright enough. Perfect. Okay. And this is where we really start to do the highlighting portion, which is the last step that sort of pulls the painting all together. So we're going to take the same detailing brush that you used to do the jar, and we're just going to make sure it's all rinsed off from all the black. And we're going to dip it in the white. And you're just going to go around certain portions of the jar to highlight it and make it look like glass. For example, you're just going to go right next to the black with a line of white. So we're going to take this here, we're going to take this here, really just anywhere you want that highlight. You don't need to go around the whole jar, you know what I mean? Like the whole rim isn't going to be outlined in white, just little parts of it. So that's what we're doing. And it's okay to overlap the black. In some cases, I would say that it's good even to do that. We're going to go over the flower to make it look more like it's in the jar. And I'm going to take this really quick and do an extra little line of black just to make sure that this line is in front of the flowers. There we go. And just a little bit of green, because the flowers should be in front of the back part of the jar but behind the front part of the jar. Just going to take the green off my brush real quick. And we're going to go back into the white. But for anyone who's still working on their jar, I'm once again going to turn it towards you and give you an opportunity to pause. Alright, so now that we've got the general highlighting on the jar done, we can move on to highlighting other areas of the painting. So we're going to dip back into the white, and this time I'm going to make sure that my brush is pretty wet, because I just want a little bit of white. And I'm going to go in, and I'm just going to do certain areas of, see how faint that white is? I'm just going to do certain areas of the stems. Like so. Just like that. Just to give the painting a bit more texture. You might not be able to see it super clearly, but I would say that's the point. And lastly, if you're satisfied with the way that your shadowing has turned out, dip into the white. And we're gonna give our flowers a little bit more texture. First, I'm gonna do a little white piece on the very top, like a little glimmer on the yellow center of the flower. And then you're gonna wanna take a decent amount of paint on your brush, a fat amount of white paint, and you're just gonna go in and do little highlights on the petals, which is why we made them sort of grayish earlier, so these white highlights would stand out. They don't stand out much, but it does give it some texture to the painting. And it's okay if it's risen as well. Like I do a little swoop at the end of my petals a lot, or I'll do like a little mark up there. And without the shadowing earlier, we wouldn't have been able to add any highlights to the daisies because they would have just been pure white. So hopefully that all makes sense now. And I'll bring it a little bit closer so you can just see where I've highlighted. And now, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna take the same detailing brush we've been using, dip it to the white once again, and this is where we're gonna do the little, you can call them glitter, you can call them particles, whatever you wanna call them, that float through the air and around the flowers. So I like to start by doing the biggest dots first and just sort of outlining the general path of where I would want them to go, because they're supposed to do like a little flow upwards. So for this one, just like the original, I'm gonna kind of do like a little spiral up above the flower, and I'm gonna do the biggest dots and go through this one. And it's okay, they're not supposed to be uniform, they're just supposed to bunch in certain areas and release in others to give it like a natural flow. And I'm gonna make them just float upwards in certain areas. And now we're just gonna go back in and add some more body to this. And you're just gonna do the dots in whatever way you like them. Obviously, they don't have to look exactly like mine. Everybody's is probably going to look a little bit different. And just add a little bit of dots in places where there are none, just a couple. Gonna add a couple here. Again, just adding more in some areas to make them more clumped. And there you go. You can see this little glitter effect that we have. And I'm just going to give everyone a minute to catch up. I'm not adding anything new to the painting now. I'm just touching up some pieces that I would like to touch up. All right. And as you can see, that brings us to the end of today's paint and sip. I'm going to bring it a little bit closer at the end just so everyone can take a look at it and everybody can maybe a little bit too close. And anyone can pause and finish up anything that they need to finish up. But that concludes it for today. Thank you guys for watching.